to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and before we even get into it, let's explain this title, While You Were Sleeping.
You struggled. We struggled with it a little bit.
Well, we did struggle, and we always try to put some clever title in there that ties in with the content of the show. This
We're not
time
going to have
around,
people going back on YouTube going, was it clever? Was it clever? I'm not
well,
so sure.
you can send in your comments and let us know just how clever we were or were not. But this one, While You Were Sleeping, ties in with what we want to talk about. We've been talking a lot to people who are looking to get in for the first time to real estate. This show, we want to talk particularly to you who are a homeowner who may have bought your home 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even longer, 20. If that's the case, chances are, well, never mind chances are, it is a fact that the real estate business has changed quite a bit. Technology has changed. Many dynamics of the real estate world have changed. So this is going to be a bit of a refresher course for you if you're considering getting back in, and many are considering getting back in, because a lot of people have been holding back because they still got that 2%, 1.9% mortgage. But as that comes due for renewal, and we talked about that in recent shows about mortgage renewals and people, you're now paying current rates for your mortgage. So the only thing holding you into your house is that you want to be there.
And Mike, and I think you're bang on the money with a lot of your observations there. I do think that people are keeping their eye on the market. There are a lot of people who are saying, oh, I might have missed that opportunity. Mm-hmm. Oh, should I? And then there are those who are wondering, well, listen, you know what, I'm where I am, and is it the devil you know? What's better, right?
Yeah.
What's better to deal with, and do I want to get back into qualification? Because even if you're keeping sort of on top of things, unless you're actually in the midst of the transaction, there are going to be things that you're probably not familiar with.
Well, for sure. And I would say in any 3 or 4 year term, looking back through recent history, the most recent 3 or 4 years, we've probably seen a greater percentage of people who might otherwise have made that move. Maybe it would be for geographical reasons. You want to be in a different town, different city. For financial reasons, perhaps you're the empty nester, you're looking to downsize, maybe you're looking to upsize. Any type of move. Sometimes people just want to move. They just want to start a new chapter in a new home. It's time to refresh and buy a home. We've been in here forever. I want to move into something different. But you've held back. So a lot of people are starting to come into the market that way. And let's start going down the list of things that are different. I mean, one of the first things you're going to realize when you start shopping for a realtor is there's far more of us out there now than there was 5, 10, 20 years ago. I came into the business, 2 decades ago. There were around 400, there were under 500 for sure realtors for all of Barrie. Now we're looking at 1,500, plus all the GTA realtors who are now doing business here too.
So let's talk about some of that. Mike,
how does that impact?
Well, one, how does it impact, but why do you think that there's been this influx? Now, for you to say just without context that you've gone from about 500 realtors to about close to 1,500 realtors, give or take, right about now? In the local district, and then add on top of that the influence of those in the GTA. Why are we seeing that change?
Well, why are we seeing so many more it's twofold. I think it's an interesting business to be in. I think you're getting a lot of the baby boomers who are hitting mid to later terms of their careers were looking for a change, or maybe they were phased out of the job they were in. They're looking around, what can I do? Well, I can take the real estate course and get my license. Not everybody gets through. It's about 1 in 4 or 5 who are still in the business 3 to 4 years in. But there's many
I think
more.
You've made an observation that there are very few people
go through the courses. Some fail, don't even get the license. Some get the license and then 3 or 4 years in don't. But some will stick it out and some make a go of it and do well. And so there's an attraction to the business for many people out there coming from all different different careers and experiences. But there's also the other side of that that's changed in my time, and this is technology related. There was a time in the good old days of real estate where if you were a real estate broker and you had 14, 15, 16 bricks and mortar offices, you hired 14 or 15 bricks and mortar realtors who worked from within those offices. Technology has made us far more virtual, so now the brokers can hire as many realtors as they want virtually without having to worry about housing them. And most brokerages have probably 2, 3, 4, 500% more realtors than they do office spaces to accommodate them, because they work from home, they work from their car, They work from
A lot
their
more-
cell phone
a lot more
of
flex
the time.
space.
There's a lot of flexibility. So there's been a lot more hiring potential within the business, and then a lot more people looking to get into the business itself.
Now, Mike, is it fair to say as well, it used to be, probably 20 years ago, a region like where we are right now would be considered remote to the GTA.
Remote, but it's... Are you thinking from the perspective of someone wanting to be in the business, or from the perspective of
I'm thinking
the homeowner?
the influence of GTA realtors in this local market.
Yeah.
Right now we have
Well-
access to technology and information, and shared boards or shared messaging across boards is really becoming the reality that
Well,
they're
we've
looking at
recently
blending.
merged
Yeah.
just this year with the Toronto real estate. Like TREB is now the largest entity of like real estate association across the country. I mean, it has been for some time. It got even bigger when it brought Barrie and Brampton's coming in. It's just slowly it's becoming
You're somebody though
single
who
entity.
takes the time and energy and effort to understand the market, study the trends, look at the data, but
Mm-hmm.
technology has certainly allowed you to do that with more ease.
Well, it's allowed
and
me
the
to do it, but
availability.
it's also allowed the consumer to do it, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things we can talk about. If you've been in your home for 20 years, maybe occasionally you'll go on Realtor.ca, look to see what's out there for properties. But there's so much more information, so much. There's a lot of private entities that are putting the data out there, and they're embellishing it even more with even more detail about neighborhoods, about schools, about crime rates, which is less of a concern here than it is if you're shopping for homes in many parts of the States. We take it for granted that wherever you go in Canada, in all likelihood, it's going to be relatively safe for your kids. But it's still a consideration. Traffic data, there's so many things. You go on the internet now, you can learn so much about a neighborhood, the area around a house you might be interested in before you ever make a move. And that's gold, because there was a time where we just rolled the dice a lot more on where we were going to buy and hoped that the things that you can learn for sure about now were going to be favorable for you back then. So that's one of the great things technology's done for home purchasing. As far as just selling a home, where your home is exposed, it used to be realtors that put the sign on the lawn and you went into the local database and went into that little gold book, perhaps, if you go back 20 years or more. So your home was exposed locally, and someone locally would end up possibly buying your home. Now your home is exposed countless ways, again through the internet and through services provided by licensed realtors, as well as a lot of private organizations, as well as a lot of the realtors also sharing the data on other listings, not just their own. So your home's getting exposed. The other thing that's changed too is our buyers are coming from far and wide now, a lot more so than they were 20 years ago.
Well, one look around the city of Barrie and you'll see on billboards, you'll see somebody who's saying, I've got Toronto buyers, I've got access to Toronto buyers. That's a marketing ploy. One, basically it's subliminal messaging for I've got a buyer who has more money.
Yeah.
Right,
That's the
implication.
And I mean, we've talked in the past, and we'll talk a bit more about just how we are more mobile and we have the flexibility to work remotely, to work further away from a central location or a central office. So we'll touch on what that manifests itself as in so many different ways as we go on here. But there's just, so many of our buyers are coming from that Golden Horseshoe GTA area now. And many of them are selling homes that are worth far more than the homes they're looking to purchase up here. So that's putting competitive pressure on the price of homes in Barrie. And we've seen that. That's been one of the largest contributing factors to the rise in prices locally. It's not necessarily the local purchasers competing with each other. It's those out of Barrie area, out of Simcoe County area buyers who are coming in here with deeper pockets, who are willing to bid up the price a lot further, and they're competing with each other for the properties up here.
So let me ask you this question though. There are people here who have been having a conversation, and we're going to get into some of these other details, the economic factors, the economic influences of late, and we're going to talk about that, what impact that's had on the number of trades in the marketplace.
Yeah.
But based on what you just talked about with access to buyers from the Golden Horseshoe, for example, what impact or what influence does that have, or should that have, on somebody who's considering whether or not to sell?
I think it gives you a little more freedom to be ambitious on your price, perhaps, at least going in. Market value is still market value, but the definition of market value has shifted, because the market value is not necessarily what people within my region are willing to pay. It's what are people within the whole region of Ontario, so central Ontario, might be willing to pay if they're coming here to Barrie. So you can be a little, take a little more risk on a higher price for a time.
So I think
just as a bit of advice, if you get 2 weeks in and you're not getting the calls, you're not getting the showings, it's time to quickly readjust your price.
Well, let me ask the question though. Traditionally speaking, somebody would have said, well, let me look at the market comparables within my region to see what they're selling. That's a statement that says, I'm not going to be a trailblazer, I'm going to follow the pack. I'm going to look at existing data and decide what I'm going to sell for, as opposed to, I think I can create the trend, right? So for somebody
you don't mind being that trendsetter if prices are on an upward trend.
Point.
If they're going the other way, you don't want to be the first one to sell for 20% lower than the last.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's my question to you, though. What should a seller be asking and expecting and demanding of their realtor when traditionally we've looked at local comparables, but you're saying that you may not need to be confined by or constrained by local trends and what local buyers are willing to pay for local homes, when there's a whole market of potential buyers out there who may not be getting the exposure unless their realtor is making sure they're getting the exposure beyond the local area.
I think that's a contributing factor to the price movement too, is not just how much you know, but how much you may not know. You may not be aware till after you've closed on your house and moved in and start talking to your new neighbors about what they paid. And you go, I may have overpaid for my home. And that will happen occasionally too. And that's not good. Your realtor, and this is one argument for hiring that local realtor. If you're living in Etobicoke and you're moving to Barrie, your Etobicoke realtors may be doing a great job for you in selling your home in Etobicoke, but may not know the local Barrie market so well. That's why it's best to have localized, local talent and local knowledge representing you on your purchase. Because, and it's not just a geographical thing. It's also how current is that information, especially when you have a quickly evolving market like we've had. It's gone up, it's gone down a bit, it's started to come back. There's going to be people out there selling today that are basing their list price on what the peak prices were a year ago. Well, I'm sorry, that home in all likelihood is not worth that today. The market value has come down some. But they're thinking, well, my neighbor sold for that much, so that's what I'm listing for. And if you come in cold to buy in Barrie and you see that home, you love it, you may be buying at that price.
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back after the break, I'm going to bug Mike a little bit more about what's changed in the profession, not just about how savvy you are in real estate, but also we'll talk a little bit about marketing and the savvy of marketing. Really, that's going to be an influential factor in your decision making. So stay with us. We'll be right back with more Hitting Home with Mike and Arif right after this break. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And before the break, Mike, we started a conversation around really what's changed. And for many people who've been in their home for at least 5 years, and there's a significant portion of the population that has taken out, whether they just bought or if they've been in their home for a while, purchased or bought or renewed and refinanced with about a 5-year term. So lots has changed. We're talking about that change in the last several years. And we talked about changes in technology, changes in trend, changes in access to information, a more inclined or connected consumer.
Yeah, we've touched on all of those, and we'll go a little deeper in some of those fields too as well.
Certainly.
Some of those
One of the things, though, that I think can't be ignored is the fact that along with changes in technology, and we're certainly talking a lot about mobile technology, Realtor.ca has gone onto your phone. That's not brand new.
Just the access to knowledge and information that's out there and how it's being provided.
Exactly, but I'm going to poke the bear just a little bit, and just like photography used to be a profession, and to all of my photographer friends, it's still a profession, but the average consumer has now thought, I can go online, or I can go to the big box store, buy myself a pretty good camera, set it on program mode or automatic mode, and I can shoot like the best of photographers. Well, so too have consumers believe that because we're on social media and know how to use a smartphone, suddenly we're experts in marketing as well.
That's it. Technology has allowed many people to participate in many different things. Photography, buying and selling a home, fixing your car, whatever. There's the access to the information.
I'm not a mechanic, but I've watched YouTube before.
Exactly, and it's made a lot of us, and there's a lot of lessons have been learned, and good on everybody for going in there and trying it. And I think what you come to realize many times over is you get an added respect for that professional photographer, whatever the field, the professional who does it at the top level. You realize just having the mock tools or the entry-level tools to attempt it does not make you the professional.
As they say,
there's
the devil's in the details for sure.
Here and here.
And the same could be said about people who venture into short-term vacation rental properties, suddenly believing that everybody can be a superhost, right?
Well, that's it. Yeah, I'm a superhost, and I'm now, I'm Donald Trump now. I'm a real estate mogul. It's there's a lot of things you learn through trial and error that are give you a rude awakening as to some of the realities.
Certainly, and when times are great and it's easy to get in and everybody's getting in, sure, you can amass a number of properties into your portfolio. The question is, if things do take a turn, not in your favor, if your condition changes, and we're going on a little bit of a tangent away from marketing. I'm going to get back to that, but
when the tide goes out,
if your station in life changes, if your employment changes, if your marital status changes, if your health changes, are you prepared? Are you still superhost capable? So let's get into marketing though a little bit though, Mike. You talked about obviously access to information and availability of information. You mentioned that we're not just dealing with our localized area. You even mentioned that the local real estate board has officially done the merge with the Toronto, it's TREB now with two B's, I believe. I'm not
two R's. Toronto Regional Real Estate Board.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's kind of like the hospital.
I'm hoping they take the Toronto out of it and make it South Central Ontario region, but maybe that's too long an acronym.
Well, note to Tim Hudak, see what he has to say about things, and
I'll get on that.
But so what's changed in marketing, and what do you as a professional realtor have to actually brush up your skills, basically, if you're in real estate, when it comes to marketing a property to ultimately your goal for a seller is it anything beyond get the highest price for the seller, or is that?
That's the ultimate goal for your seller, is you want to bring them the highest return possible for their property. The market's going to determine what that is, but your influence there is not just exposing it to the greatest audience potential. That is a big key part of it, but it's what are you exposing? And that's where technology comes into play, because now we can do the virtual tour where we can virtually walk you through the home. We can create 3D LiDAR imaging, which creates like a dollhouse that you can virtually online walk from room to room and look at that house like you're actually there. You have the drone shots. And these are choices each individual realtor and their client have to make. Do I want all of that? And I think most clients would say, yes, I do want all of that. But the reality is, if you're going for the entry-level realtor whose whole marketing ploy is that I'll do this for less than anybody else, chances are you're going to get the product that has less features than many of the others who are giving you full service. And if you want full service, there's a price for it, but that price is compensated because you've increased your chances of a better return, because you're exposing your house in a much better light and you're exposing it to far more people, and the end result in all likelihood is going to be a better return when you do finally sell.
So I'm going to play a little caution here, if you will, from the legal perspective, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, don't even play one on TV, but a little, careful how good your marketing is, because there's always the flip side of that marketing. And Mike, you had yourself witnessed an experience when you were recently on vacation about some phenomenal marketing that presented this property.
It still has to be within the bounds of reality.
Absolutely.
And ethical.
Yes,
true representation.
But there are occasions where the marketing's just a little bit too good. Now, buyer beware, and it's still an obligation, and it's still a realtor's obligation to encourage the purchaser to do their homework and get an inspection and go through the proper things. But sometimes too good marketing, too good Photoshop could actually be hiding some elements.
Well, that's the other side of that too. You can virtually stage a home to make it look like something it's not, and I have a problem with that. I think your marketing should reflect the reality. If the ceiling's falling down, then it should be clearly
it's kind of like a dating app.
Clearly known within. Well, that's the thing. It's like the online dating thing, I guess. You can have a great profile on there, and then that first showing or that first date, that's when reality kicks in. And this is where I think it's important, and I've always advocated strongly for having a buyer representative. If you're going out there to buy a home, if you're just going on your own to view homes, and it's the listing agent who's there, their loyalty lies first and foremost with that seller. And if it happens to be a realtor who's maybe not giving you 100% of the facts or embellishing things, you may not know. If you have the buyer agent coming in, that's one of the key jobs of the buyer agent, is to determine the difference between reality and what's being presented, if there is a difference between the two. And if those red flags come out, the average consumer might miss some of them, but a realtor who's doing this day in, day out as a buyer representative is hopefully going to catch those things, and then that can be reflected in how you perform from there. Do you want to put an offer in maybe at a lesser price, or maybe you want to just turn and run?
So Mike, let me ask you,
the buyer agent's key, I think.
What has changed during the art of the negotiation over the last few years?
Well, what's changed is, and I wouldn't say for the better, I prefer the good old days when you would go in and sit at a table with the other agent and their client at the table. You would make your case. If you're representing the buyer, you're making the case for your buyer. You're telling them about their life, a little bit of their background, why they love the home, what they hope to do with that home. You can create a picture and present a human aspect to the whole presentation. On the other side, you hear why the seller is protecting their price or what they're looking for ultimately. So the communication level is heightened with the face-to-face. More often than not now, offers are, they're put together online, the documents are sent over. I always like to follow it up with a cover letter, which hopefully, paints that picture that I described you might do face-to-face. Very few realtors do that, but I always put that cover letter in there because there's always more details than are evident within the cold
fill in the blank
application. Exactly. And I always want to have a conversation with that realtor too, and say, I'm sending you an offer right now, and here's what to expect. Too often than not, it's just send in the offer, wait to see what happens. There's 2 or 3 other offers in there. I've had offers where I've won because I've had that cover letter in there where I've explained it. And I even, as recently as a year ago, had the conversations that my client said, your offer is a little bit less than the others, but they like what you're willing to do, and they like the idea that you're flexible on a closing date, which is going to work for them. There's no room in that document for that.
There's a reason why I asked you about, and I phrased it the way I did, about the art of the negotiation.
Yeah.
Now, it's highly unlikely that you're going to turn the clocks back in terms of the use of technology and automation and the convenience and the ability to do things flexibly and remote.
It's made us, I don't want to say lazy, but it's taken away the human element.
So that's my point. That's my question, Mike. How can you, as a realtor who sits actively on a board, embrace and certainly continue to embrace the evolution and the improvements in technology, but encourage your professional colleagues to not forget about the art of negotiation and restore
the
some of that?
technology should not be thought of as something that replaces the art of negotiating, that replaces the human element of it. And I'll give you an example of that. Much of our communication is email, text message, back and forth. And I never just send a text. In fact, some people fault me for this, and maybe even you'll say, why don't you just text me? I'm still old school. I want to do the phone.
Have I actually said that to you?
I want to do the phone call because there's a human element to something that your thumbs just can't, project. And text messages sent to another busy realtor, he may not or she may not see that text message that came in that was time sensitive until later in the day. Perhaps an offer has come in on the property and there's information you need to get now, and they're not checking their message. You may have sent them an email. It might go into their spam email. You just don't know. So if I'm sending the email or I'm sending the text message, it's more than likely going to be accompanied by a phone call saying, I just want you to know I sent you a message and here's why I said what I did. And it's far more effective. And just relying on the technology in and of itself, I think, is taking away a lot
Mike,
of the
I would say to you, I think
potential.
you're bang on in your observations, and actually, as someone who is heavily involved in technology these days, that is certainly something that we communicate with our associates and with our associates who are communicating with our clients.
Yeah.
It is 100%. Pick up the phone. You can certainly respond and provide confirmation emails that give you the details in writing so that you have a frame of reference for the future. But nothing replaces an actual conversation. We do a lot of video calls, but yeah.
And there's a whole generation, or maybe two generations now, that they're intimidated by the telephone. They like the anonymity of just doing everything by text.
So, Mike, we have to go to break, but when we come back from the break, now that we've covered some of these changes and some of the technological changes and marketing changes, let's actually dive into some of the realities of what people can expect in terms of future transactions, and let's also maybe dispel some of that rumor mill or some of that conditioning that the headlines have put sort of the fear of into people in the marketplace. Let's actually provide a little bit of more of a realistic outlook on what you can expect as you may very well be entering into the real estate market and in a transaction for the first time since many of these changes have taken place. We'll be right back after this break with more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And during this show, we've been talking about what's been happening while you've been sleeping. A little bit of a play on words, Mike. As you said, we kind of struggled to find, what's that catchphrase to bring people in. But really, if I was to summarize this in our conversation while we're sleeping, kind of is what's been happening while many people have been out of the market.
Yeah, and many of them have. And I've been working with clients. One this spring sold their house that I sold to them 20 years ago. So over 20 years, a lot has changed, and they even pointed it out to me, the notable differences.
Sure.
The lack of paper.
Absolutely.
We've saved a lot of trees.
We've been talking though really about technological advances and also marketing and things like that, and certainly what a seller should be considering. But if you're actually entering into the market for the first time in at least 5 years, let's call it that, and much has changed, you might be entering in the market to sell. You might be reconsidering, and we talked about maybe you're now an empty nester. Maybe you now have the ability to relocate because you have the flexibility of working remotely. Maybe other things have changed in life.
So you're selling, and then you're buying back in.
Now you're also buying back in, and so basically for you who are watching, we're going to also be talking about what should a buyer be considering. A lot of people have been hesitant. They're like, there's been some jobs uncertainty during COVID, or there's been some economic uncertainty, and you know what? Maybe I'm best not to ruffle any feathers and just sort of stay where I am. Sure, but there's also some opportunities that are out there. And Mike, I think you also made a point of saying, let's also make sure that we're talking to people who who aren't the ones who are necessarily hesitant because they're not sure that they can afford. There are a lot of people who have been sitting on equity. If you look at the market trends and prices over the last several years, you're certainly sitting on some equity. Yeah, even if we've seen a recent decline of, call it 10 to 15%, it's not necessarily 10 to 15% off the value of the home, but maybe reducing on the overbidding and some of that stuff. So maybe it's kind of tempered.
It's adjusted a bit. I mean, that's a percentage off of that peak price, which was an anomaly in and of itself and very short-lived. So you can't say my home price was this much for 10 years and now it's down here. No, your home was this price for 10 minutes. And now it's back down here.
And something
which
I
is
share
still
with clients
ahead of where
a
it was
lot of the
2 months
time
before.
is simply this. The end number only happens when the sold sign goes up and you actually change hands, right? You haven't lost and you haven't won until that number actually hits.
And something, I mean, if we're going to go into some of the pluses and minuses of the way the market is now compared to where it was when you last, traded real estate, if you are a homeowner now, and you're selling and buying again, whatever's a positive on one side is a negative on the other and vice versa. So you might, the challenges you might face as a buyer are today that you may not have faced 15 years ago is there's far more Toronto area buyers that you're going to be competing with to buy that home. That's going to mean you're likely going to have a more favorable bid on the home. You might have been able to come in 10, 15% under list. The market right now has picked up. It's a little more active.
Your offer's not even getting seen.
So you have to be mindful of that. And you might go, well, now I'm going to pay $20,000 potentially more than I want to for that home. But you just finished selling your home where it was influenced by the same factors and you were on the receiving end of them, so you received that much more in all likelihood for that home. So it's kind of a wash. So.
I'm gonna poke the bear a little bit once again. I'm probably going to have somebody throw garbage at the screen.
You're going to have the advocates for the bears on you pretty soon if you keep doing this.
Keep poking the bear. Absolutely. But here's the thing. If you're a day trader, then that overbid or that underbid, that factor that you either won or lost the offer on is going to play relevant.
Well, that's what you're leveraging. But this
if
is
you're
where
a day trader.
Things can turn, the key word there is day. The real estate market doesn't trade in a day. Chances are the market you're selling in, you're also buying in. I mean, if we had the ability to foresee, and we did see those changes happen so rapidly and within the span of a week or a month even, you might step out.
There are always exigent circumstances. Actually, it's funny you say that because I was recently talking with a client who made the decision to sell and decide to rent while they were considering what their next move was.
And it really didn't fare well for them.
In this particular case, it didn't. And there are people who sold at the peak and decided to rent, and it was perfect timing for them. But you can't bank on things that are beyond your control. It is rolling the dice. So there are people right now who are continuing to rent because they can't justify what they can get for what they would be willing to pay, and two, interest rates and qualification requirements have changed that has actually really tightened the screws on their ability to qualify.
And the money you may risk in doing such a move, I think you need to be comfortable knowing that I'm willing to lose that amount of money.
And certainly if you're buying with the market, there's an issue.
It's not going to impact you, then go ahead. But I mean, if this is going to impact on your lifestyle and your family's lifestyle by taking that risk, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should play a little more conservatively with the buying and selling of real estate. The best hedge for investment in real estate is time. And whatever price you buy at today, whether it's a little bit over what market value might be, or you got a bargain, if you hold for 5 years, 10 years, it's almost a certainty that you're going to build equity and you're going to have a positive return.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of investment, Mike, let's shift gears just a little bit. So we're talking about people who are getting into the market, absolutely.
Yeah.
But life's changed, and some of the changes that we talked about earlier haven't just impacted real estate, but they've impacted consumers in general. They've impacted people in general, our ability to do our job, our ability to enjoy life. Social media has allowed me to connect with people I went to school with 35 years ago, who are living or worse, across the Atlantic or across the Pacific or whatever it may be that they live. So it's also, though, changed our abilities and our flexibilities and creative flexibilities and opportunities in our daily lives. And some of that has meant that people can leave living in a major urban center if that's what they choose to do. There's been a bit of a surge and a trend towards, I want to get away from peopling a little bit. I'd like a piece of land. I want to go to the East Coast. I want to go to the Midwest. I want to go wherever. I want to just leave an urban center and go a little bit more remote. So that doesn't mean you're retired.
You don't have to be a pioneer necessarily to do it nowadays. There's a lot of the conveniences that travel with you.
Broadband, fiber, Starlink, changes in technology have allowed things like that to happen. So there are people who've decided, and wait for it, but let's say they happen to have a vacation property, we'll call it a cottage, they've had a cottage, and they've now decided to make their cottage their home.
Yeah, and I'm seeing incidents of that again and again. I've been showing cottage properties lately, and the number of them that are primary residents now, and it's typically those who are at or near that retirement age who are doing it. I'm seeing, but it's at any age. You could, if you're continuing to work, as long as you have the technology access, like high-speed internet and that, to continue to do your job, and the ability to work remotely, depending on the type of job you have. Obviously, if you're a carpenter, you can't do carpentry from your cottage up on, Lake
Hey,
Joseph.
ChatGPT, build me a house. You know what I mean? It doesn't exactly
it doesn't work that way. But I mean, if your service is something that can be automated, or at least through automation, you can continue the service.
So, but I think a like comparison, and this is a trend that we certainly saw. I'm going to call it starting about 12 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. But we used to have people who had multi-car homes, and the evolution and technology and design of the pickup truck has made the pickup truck for many their primary driver, their primary vehicle.
They're not cheap, but at least you can get away with one.
You're getting one instead of two. You're getting 4 doors and a big trunk, and you can do your weekend warrior and get your groceries.
And
if
you everyone's
can
working for home rather than the husband going over here and the wife going over here to work, if you're all working from that central location, in theory, that can be
absolutely
a good thing.
So there are those of us who are also flirting with the idea, depending on where we are in our stage in life, have computer, have internet connection, not just can work from anywhere locally, but can actually work from anywhere remotely. And there are those people. So now what comes into play, Mike, is I'm going to suggest, and this is going to add a little bit of a layer of complexity, but you said you've been showing some cottage properties. It's incredible the number of cottage properties that were traditionally 3-season homes.
Yeah.
And 3-season homes, if we get time to talk about it today, are also homes that are ones that banks have been considered a little bit risky, or they have a lower appetite for it. You need to go in either all cash or certainly at least 50% equity down in order to access some financing. There's a bit of an asterisk there. Don't necessarily hold yourself to that, because if we get a chance to talk about it, we will. But that has allowed people to work remotely, maybe be here in Ontario during the spring, summer, fall months, and maybe look at other destinations.
To a southern climate for the
whether
winter.
It's in the south, whether it's in Florida, whether it's in an island property, whether it's Costa Rica, something like that, for the winter.
It's a scenario that's working for
some,
people.
That's not a reality. But for a sufficient number of people, it is a reality. All you have to do is go look at the 30,000 islands and look at the number of vacation properties
there's that scenario,
water access
and then there's also the 3-season property that maybe with a little bit of investment, and maybe you're taking some equity from your sale to buy into that cottage, or selling, you already own the cottage and it's 3-season, you're selling the house, now you have the equity to maybe do the insulating, do the upgrading that's going to make it a year-round residence. And it might be a little bit of cash, might be a lot of cash, but you need to assess that. And
So
see
when
what
we
the
come
cost's
back
gonna
from the
be.
break,
Yeah.
let's talk
Let's talk
about
more
some
that.
of these
Yeah.
options, some of these opportunities, and some things to talk about your other partners who are you are likely to bring into the transaction, whether it's your lawyer or your accountant. So
Yeah.
we've got more as we go into options and changes and things that are new in the last few years that might be becoming more mainstay in your decision making. We'll be right back after this break with more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV. And Mike, we've been talking today, the show's headline, or whatever you want to call it, tag is called While You Were Asleep. Changes that have been happening in the market, changes in economic realities, changes in technology, marketing, certainly for people who might have been out of the market for at least the last couple of years.
I'd say 5, 10, 15, 20 even.
Even
Yeah.
for some, absolutely. But I do think it's also important that we make it very clear that who we're talking to today are people who are prepared to go into the market, who maybe have that equity that we've been talking about, whether they've been around 5 or 20 years. Certainly you've got some equity, even if there's been some slight shifts. We're not really talking today to people who, regardless of where the market is, they're struggling.
The first-time buyer, yeah. We've done
That's
more
not
than,
really
more than a
today's
fair
show.
share of shows, and we'll do more. But today we're just talking to those people who, hey, I have my home, it's time for a move. What are my options? What's different today than the last time I did
You're
this?
right, Mike. We absolutely have done a fair number of those episodes, and I think we will continue to do those again. But we actually, as we got towards the end of the last segment, we started talking about some of the shifts in reality and the opportunities that have presented themselves. One, in change in place in life, maybe maturity or equity that's been built up, but also the opportunities that technology have provided, working remote, and really the trend of there is a significant trend of people who have been vacating the GTA and actually turning towards their vacation properties, secondary properties, cottage properties, and converting them and turning them into their primary residence. And just a little tidbit on that, even the 3-season properties for people who might be looking at living south or in a warmer destination in the winter, or as you touched on, looking at converting those properties into 4-season properties.
Well, the cottage has changed in that it's no longer just that warm weather place to go and
not necessarily just
hang
the
out
cabin.
for the weekend. Yeah, I mean, people are coming to the realization that the cottage they own or the cottage they'd like to own could be far more than just a seasonal destination. It can be a year-round home, and technology has allowed for that. But more so than technology, the nuts and bolts that make up a cottage. They're different from that 4 Seasons home.
Yeah, I want to touch on a trend, Mike, because
we'll go into the details on that. But go ahead.
we were talking about this offline before we started the show, and you actually mentioned to me that you saw that generationally, or the numbers are that from one generation to the next, there's a bit of either a sense of guilt or maybe a lack of interest, or maybe people thought, I have to go to the cottage every weekend now. That's been sort of a talking point amongst families where they didn't necessarily, it was a good idea at first and then they didn't really embrace it. But the ability literally to move there and not have to fight long weekend traffic or weekend traffic in the summer and actually live there has been a game changer.
Oh, for sure. And I said as well that my observation's it's been like the baby boomer generation and up that's doing it. And quite likely because a larger portion of the demographics of cottage owners are in that age category. They already own the cottages. The younger people are less likely to own a cottage. They may want to, and they're hopeful and have plans to, but we're talking to all of them, those who are already in, those who would like to get in. And I mean, losing the primary residence you have now to do it, I mean, there's a strategy to it. You don't just say, okay, I'm going to sell my home and then buy a cottage. It might be best to manage both for a while, and talk a little bit about that and why that's important from a
let me set a little
economic
expectation
perspective.
with that then as well, Mike. I think you're absolutely right to mention that first and foremost. That there's a strategy in there that you'll want to definitely speak with a savvy broker about.
Yeah.
Right? Definitely don't do this on your own, and I'm going to go so far as to say, before you commit to just going to your local branch, because that's where you've always done things, I'm going to say it one more time, enlist the services of a savvy broker. I'll tell you why though, Mike. Here's the thing. We talked about this in the break. The cottage itself, the value is quite possibly not in the structure.
Yeah.
But the value is quite likely in the land, and therefore convert, if it's possible to throw in some insulation and some 3M this and that and whatever and call it a 4-season, great. But it is quite possible you're going to be looking at a renovation.
Yeah.
All right. Or
There's
maybe even a
renovations.
tear down and a rebuild. Again, the value is quite likely in the land and in the location. A couple things to take into consideration. If it's water access only, if there is no fire access or fire route, you're likely going to have some really considerable restrictions on your ability to gain financing on that property.
For sure. And if it's primarily wood heated, that's going to be a challenge too for insurance and therefore getting the mortgage. But the number of things that go far beyond anything we can discuss here today. But first and foremost, you need your home to be insulated properly for 4 seasons. And that might require changing single pane windows to double pane, insulated doors, insulation in the floor and all the exterior. Well, in order to have the water year-round, you first have to have the insulation, or those pipes are going to freeze up.
Right.
You want to be, if you're living year-round and you're not off the grid, but you're borderline, you want to have a generator if you're in a region where it's all like high likelihood of being without power at various times of the year, especially if the power goes out in the winter. You want a generator to kick in that's going to keep the home heated above zero so that you don't have all your pipes freezing.
And you may want to
bursting.
look at both a combination gas as well as electric.
Well, that's
a
it.
battery-powered generator.
Considerations that we just don't even enter the mind when you're living within an urban center. But these are a lot of different things when you're out in that frontier of cottage land you need to be considering and mindful of ahead of time. The other thing that I would touch on is there continues to be changes, and they're driven by environmental considerations with regards to wells, septic tanks, water access, like your setbacks from the water, whether or not, can you put a boathouse? You can't build a boathouse in Ontario anymore, but you can buy a cottage that maybe has one existing, it's grandfathered in. But there's a lot of different, even as far as, putting a break wall at the water line. You may not be able to do that. So there's many things to look into.
Another thing you definitely need to take into consideration when considering buying a cottage property is the fact that many areas are actually considered First Nations territory, and you might actually be purchasing the right to use the property, and you might be buying the structure, but the land itself may be leased land, and that is going to be a factor. But here's something I want to touch on.
You may not own the rights to your water either.
Yeah. Here's something I want to touch on, though, and I think this is important.
Short of the water for ownership. You might have use of it, but you may not own it. And that's a consideration.
Absolutely.
A good realtor, or savvy realtor, as you said, is going to be looking into for you before you ever lay out any money.
For sure. We talked about in the last segment, or it might have been the segment before though as well, Mike, of people who, while times were great and interest rates were low and it just seemed like the gold rush was never going to end, people bought multiple properties and they said, I'm going to own a bunch of things that I'm going to put on Airbnb or similar type of platforms. And then suddenly, here's the reality. There it is. The qualifications and regulations have changed. Just because you bought it doesn't mean you get to keep it. When financial constraints and regulations change, you still have to be able to meet the obligation to renew or refinance and maintain your property.
We went into that in depth recently.
We did go into that in another episode recently. Well, similarly, there are people who have purchased a vacation property, certainly even during COVID. That went a little bit crazy, right? People bought vacation properties because they couldn't travel, so they're going to go to the cottage. But here's the thing. they may have overextended themselves. If they purchased when interest rates were 1% or 1.9%, and now they're 6.25%, and they've got to keep carrying their home and their car payment and their line of credit that was variable to prime, or a factor of prime, right? And now they've got this cottage property, and it's no longer a primary residence, and they're not getting rental income from it.
Well,
and the banks aren't going to look at Airbnb type of short-term rental as qualified income. Most. You might find one that will, most won't. You might see a number of cottage properties come on the market because people are feeling the pinch.
There's that, but then at the same time, you're also seeing more interest in those cottage properties.
That's where I'm going, Mike.
From those who realize, hey, I can use it, 5 or 6 weekends a year and rent it out the rest of the time. And they do the quick math on a napkin and realize we can make $10,000 a year over and above what we're paying to carry this.
For those who exercise some
we'll get into.
delayed gratification and are now thinking about leaving the GTA, and we're sitting on some equity, while there were others who might have spread themselves a little bit thin, I'm suggesting, may present itself an opportunity. Certainly a cash buyer is going to be in a strong position, but I'm also going to suggest that it is a really good idea, again, speak to someone who knows how cottage financing works. You may not be getting it from the big six, you might be getting it from local credit union or something like that, so definitely speak to your broker. The other thing I was going to say though, Mike, is if you want to watch out for protecting your investment, certainly speak to your lawyer and your accountant about putting the property perhaps into a trust, because when you are selling a non-primary residence, you're subject to capital gains. If you put it into a trust, there might still be some tax implications there. But you might be able to sort of feather that out and soften the blow. So certainly putting things into a trust and protecting it for future generations.
Another good conversation to have in doing your due diligence when buying a cottage is, if you believe that you're going to want to do the bed and breakfast type thing where you're going to be renting out and bringing an income from that, have a look at what your local municipality, how they look upon this. Has there been a lot of complaints? Because there's a lot of areas, and
you just have to look at Oro Mondante.
It's within the rights of the municipality to make a across-the-board decision that no, we're not going to allow for these short-term rentals of holiday properties or vacation properties. And if you were counting on that, and that suddenly pulled out from under you 2 or 3 months in. So you want to be, there's no absolute guarantee
Mike, I'm just going to
happen,
piggyback on that, just real quick.
Sure.
The municipality may have some restrictions on it, and your bank will have some restrictions on it. You got to look at paragraph whatever, 35 or whatever it is in your contract, because if you're selling it as a personal or as a rental property, and you actually decide you're going to try and cheat the system and do it on a short term, it's not going to work. It's going to catch up to you. We got to go.
And I'll add to that, on the other side of that, if you are or looking to buy a property, do you want those Airbnb type, and I don't mean to use the term Airbnb because I know it's a branded
short-term rental.
Short-term rental properties all around you, but where they're in on the weekend, partying it up and putting all the garbage out on Monday that sits there and blows down the street until Thursday. I hear those complaints too. So.
We've covered a lot of ground, and we've covered a lot of ground of changes in technology, changes in marketing, changes in transaction, changes in finance. There's still so much more that we could be talking about, but we are out of time. And we want to thank you for joining us on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif.
If you're buying or selling in the near future, and it's been a while, hopefully this show's been helpful to you.
We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.